Hello, everyone, and it is already our fourth meeting in the frames of ANIZOTROPIA show public program. And during these online events, we are speaking about topics related to exhibition or provoked by it. And today we will speak about philosophical approach to understanding contemporary art. We will dive into philosophical ideas in the basis of this exhibition and contemporary art in general. And I'm happy to introduce the speakers of this exciting conversation. Please meet Arie Amaya Akkermans, writer, researcher, and curator living and working in Istanbul and previously in Moscow, Beirut, and Bahrain. His work centered around continental philosophy and historical archaeology deals with collapse of historical systems, philosophies, and theories of history, and the relationship between archaeology and contemporary art practices. Hello, Arie.
Hi, Anna.
Great to see you here. And by the way, Arie wrote an introductory text to ANIZOTROPIA show by Valentin Korzhov, so this man deeply understands what we are going to talk about. Our second speaker and our first hero in ANIZOTROPIA show is Valentin Korzhov. Valentin, hi.
Hello, everyone. Hello, my friends. Art and philosophy is quite difficult and quite solid and quite dense topic for me. Elena, my friend, my interpreter, will help me. Okay, Elena?
I'll be translating.
Let me continue to introduce our speakers. And by the way, it will be very interesting to find out what philosophical discoveries are waiting for us during the show. And I will remind the address where to visit the show. It is artcage.art, then exhibitions, then ANIZOTROPIA. Please go there to see the show. And our third speaker today is Paul Razera Contreras, researcher, artist, professor of art, science, and technology. And he is also a multimedia artist working with speculative realism, scientific information, and fictional narratives. His body of work intervenes distinct epistemologies, ranging from indigenous thinking to the history of science. He explores topics related to geopolitics, environmental issues, and experimentation on future sustainable settings. Paul's works were widely displayed around the world, including Venice Biennale. He participated in Antarctic Biennale, where he was producer and director. And Paul continues his research in remote locations of our planet. Hi, Paul.
Hello, thanks for the invitation. Hello, everyone. Happy to share this panel with you.
And I'm Anna Shvets. I'm the founder of Teachers Arts Management, and today I will be a bad cop because from the position of producer of art events, as I am, it's not so easy to sell the deep philosophical context to the audience and to the sponsors. So let's see. And today, being in different time zones, we are uniting in our discussion Eastern Europe, South America, and Western Asia, and hopefully we will find the common ground. Hi, everyone. And the first and very important question I'd address to Arie as a master of introductory observations. What is the role of philosophy in contemporary art, and what are those philosophical movements that influence contemporary artists?
I think that always when you ask these questions, difficulty that the questions are wrong to begin with, and the questions will always be wrong. You're talking about like what things are and how things work, and things always tend to get complicated. If you're going to talk about what's the role of philosophy in contemporary art, so you have to question, first of all, what is philosophy? I mean, what it does. And second, whether contemporary art exists or not, and what is this thing that we call contemporary. In general, I kind of agree with this thesis of Susan Sontag when she said that, I mean, when she was talking kind of specifically about modern art rather than contemporary, but she was always saying that art is the condition of the past in the present. If we are going to agree with this, that art is the condition of the past in the present, then the idea of contemporary art is an oxymoron, because there can be no such a thing as contemporary art. And then I will also say that contemporary art is also this thing which is almost about nothing. It has actually, I mean, there is very, very, very little content in it, but this almost matters a lot. I would say that whether there is a role or what's the role of philosophy in contemporary art, I think that philosophy, I mean, at least in some of its European versions of things that happened in the 50s, in the 60s, 70s is probably the foundation of contemporary art. I'm saying trying to meet this demand to escape from the material and to reenact something that had been tried at the beginning of the modern era, I mean in the early 20th century with surrealism and Dadaism, kind of to deny the existence of this boundary between art and life and all kinds of social and political movements and, I mean, existence itself. So contemporary art actually started as a very unambitious movement, sort of a reaction to a certain tradition. But now that we have gone so far down in this, let's say, genealogy of what contemporary art is, we are faced with this problem, which is a philosophical problem of how is it possible for contemporary art to have a history, and actually it has a history. Today, contemporary art is a historical form. It begins with certain dates. Probably it doesn't have an end yet, though sometimes we talk about things that happen after contemporary art and the emergency and so on. So contemporary art has become just another art historical form. Philosophy has provided a lot of, I'm not going to call it just inspiration, but it has provided a lot of ammunition for contemporary art to gain certain theoretical underpinnings to contemporary art. To have a certain foundation. I think, and in discussing the role of philosophy in contemporary art, I also need to distinguish between contemporary art and art theory. Between philosophy and art theory, because we are not necessarily talking about the same thing. Art theory is a subchapter in certain parts of philosophy. It's a subchapter of aesthetics, a philosophy of perception, and so on. Whereas the philosophies that inform contemporary art tend to be always of a more general nature, things that have to do with the philosophical response to the end of Western metaphysics, certain questions of aesthetics, a lot of things about history and politics. The actual aesthetic theory, which is not about beauty but about perception, on which art theory is actually grounded, it will seem very boring to most people working in contemporary art today. I mean, if you're going to read, I don't know, Crotch aesthetics or Hegel or Kant, I mean, if that's the starting point, things get boring real fast. I would say the starting point comes a lot later. It starts with, like, I don't know, Schleiermacher and somewhere in the German 19th century, some Protestant thinkers, and this idea of to reconsider what happens with beauty in a situation in which the classical system of metaphysics has this holy trinity of truths, the true, the good, and the beautiful. And they kind of part ways between the 18th and the 19th century as the building of metaphysics is kind of falling apart a little bit. And then the aesthetics comes to rescue beauty from this broken triangle, and then relates beauty to art. So it's like beauty and art come to mean the same. Today, if you would tell any contemporary artist that art is about beauty, I mean, people will say, like, you may have lost your mind. You are speaking of a whole era. Basic idea is that art used to be about beauty. That's what we believe. The replacement art came to replace traditional religion in many ways. So in the sort of secular universe, art and beauty were more or less identical. And then philosophy somehow has complicated things more than it has cleared them. Precisely because philosophy has complicated itself more than it has cleared its problem. When you ask the question of whether there are philosophical movements which I'm saying, like, enable contemporary art, I think, again, we're going to say, like, that this is a question which appears very normal to a non-philosopher, but for philosophers, I mean, the question is wrongly formulated in the sense of the idea of contemporariness and schools is incompatible, because we are no longer talking about schools. We also don't have schools in contemporary art. I mean, you can talk about certain groups of painters. I don't know, like in the American West. But it's hard to talk about groups. It's hard to talk about schools. I think everybody is kind of working mostly on their own. I think that the last great philosophical school that we had was, I would say, these children of Heidegger. So it was like the last really great philosophical movement. Of course, the philosophical movement that I think was very interesting, but very wrong at the same time. I mean, it became controversial. It produced all kinds of really bad theory, particularly in France and Italy. It has been blamed for everything from the rise of neo-Nazi, the collapse of literary theory, and probably in many of the cases the accusations have been correct. I think in order to ask the question of, like, how could philosophy influence art or artists, you have to first position yourself in such a way that again, that you're asking the right questions of, like, I mean, do artists need this philosophy, or like what rather than, I mean, other than being artistic practice, and sort of intellectual activity which requires some theoretical foundations. It's also it's an industry, and sometimes you need to produce some stuff. Somebody's going to sell, somebody's going to put in their shop, which they call galleries, and you need a convincing story to sell your product in your shop. And I think the most convincing story is one that the hearer does not understand. It has this sort of, it has all this air of mystique, of something which is out of reach, but that essentially a lot of this art discourse, which is based in philosophy, remains marketing. I mean, it's a marketing language which relies on this obscurity to make to create this object of desire. For the most part, artists and I would even say art critics, I mean, they don't know anything about philosophy. They found some quotations in some books, some curatorial texts tend strongly towards certain philosophers. Like I would say, like Foucault has been very important, and Adorno and so on. Philosophers which are very difficult to read, not only because they tend to be obscure, but you need a very strong background to what these books are saying. And what also something that is interesting for me is how little interest philosophy actually has in contemporary art. In many ways, philosophy is a very traditional discipline. It has remained largely unchallenged for centuries. It moves very slowly. The tradition is old and slow and sloppy and kind of boring. Philosophy, for example, produced a certain rather important body of work about modern art, in which philosophers participated. Foucault and Deleuze, everyone from Heidegger to Hannah Arendt to Benjamin to Adorno had interesting and important things to say about contemporary art. But I don't think that they take about modern art, but they don't take contemporary art seriously enough. But contemporary art does take philosophy very seriously. I mean, as we say, sometimes for the wrong reason. So I would say it's kind of impossible to answer the question that you have formulated, which is why I think it's kind of interesting. I would say, for example, in the case of Valentin, I mean, and he will get to speak about his work, there is a certain reliance on philosophy, certain philosophers, which explain his very curious notion of history, prehistory, and kind of the critique of the postmodern and of things that about relativism, metaphysics, and all kinds of things which Valentin disagrees with, let's say, with the mainstream art world. So there is a lot of philosophical import in this conversations, in these objects, underlie certain concepts. It's always possible to have different readings, but I would say, in principle, it is very difficult to separate his work from these philosophical narratives. And I'm saying this is not always the sometimes. I mean, when you read some press releases or you read some books and you're like, okay, this is just somebody's just talking here about they're making up some stuff.
Sorry for interrupting. Valentin, can you please join us? Let's listen to the artist himself. And my question will be, continue what Arie was saying. What is your opinion about the role of philosophy in art in general, and how philosophy reflects
Well, to me, it's always a challenge to participate in any meeting with Arie. And the question itself, whether there is a contemporary art in general, whether it exists, but I will be way smaller than this huge issue, if you allow me. I will only touch the questions of art, not the art and not the philosophy, but the and between those two. If this and, the end between art and philosophy exists, and whether these are really different, are they really such different categories? Aristotle, of course, spoiled a lot of things for us with this categorizing and this split onto poetry, theory, and practice. And I think this is where we can start the conversation about the split onto philosophy and art. To me, Heidegger is more about finalizing this split. I see that Arie is looking at me with the horror in his eyes, but I will try to be as precise as I can. To me, the question of art and philosophy is a question of transcendency. Actually, when we are talking about some kind of intellectual meditation, observation, and these are two equal trajectories for me, which lead to ascension. For example, I would like to start from an example. If we are such children of Heidegger, or all about Heidegger here, let's try to reflect on such a thing as proportion, the ratio. It's that very golden ratio that we all know. Look up Pacioli and Leonardo da Vinci called it the divine ratio, the divine proportion. And let's have a look whether there is that and in perception, philosophy and art, whether it exists. To me, there are a few situations which allowed me to join this moment of intellectual observation. And if we continue talking about that very Aristotle, to me it was a huge discovery that, for example, in his Ethos, the Tractate of Ethos, Aristotle moved to the ratio, to the issue of ratio very soon. For example, talking about the indifference and mindlessness, that there is a certain ratio of bravery and honesty, and that the ethical basics is in a way some kind of mathematical model. If we move on, we move to Plato. Let's be fast. It's a quick move to his central work, the Timeo dialogue, Timaeus, which begins through from the cosmogonic beginning of the world. From the equality and otherness, where the whole cosmogonic model is based on some ideal ratio, the ideal ratio of the equal and other. And this is a fundamental philosophical text which focuses on the question of proportion and of the ratio. My only experience of being in front of Rothko's picture painting in Louvre in Abu Dhabi 2 years ago. There's a bench and I was sitting on it in front of a 4 meter high painting of Rothko and looking at two huge squares, a red and dark red, split by a line, and I could nearly perceive the proportion of these colors and shapes almost with every millimeter of my body. The same way as I was perceiving this proportion while reading the works of Aristotle. But Luca Pacioli and Leonardo da Vinci went further, and in his work on the divine proportion, this was what today could be called the science art, in which both the thinker and the mathematician and the artist, they are all united. So telling you about these events, I keep wondering whether this end between art and philosophy exists, or is it all because of Aristotle's works? And also it seems to me that I have somewhat managed to a little bit make this split softer between art and philosophy. If we talk about my works, I've been searching this edge between art and philosophy throughout all my life. As a sculptor, which is my basic education and occupation, it's a sculptor, I search the shapes. I studied shape. And the question that I can hear in Heidegger's text, if we talk about the origins of art, it's the question that I've been wondering about since I was a child, since I first took a piece of clay into my hands. Where is the shape? Is it within my sculpture? Where is that bloody shape? Or is it outside the sculpture? And what is space? And what is the edge between the sculpture and the space outside it? Or maybe the sculpture itself is that edge, that border. And this is the transcendency. And maybe this is the transcendency, where the line of the shape, which is both infinity and nothingness and nothing, because it's just a line which you can split infinitively, and Achilles will never reach the turtle. And of course, the texts that I read, the text of Heidegger that I keep reading, and the figures, the sculptures that I can see in Louvre, though they are all for me the same transcendency, the possibility of ascension into the universe, one of the existential potentials of which is that very ratio, the proportions within which I work on my shape. So what about the time, Anna? What do you think time-wise? I could make another example.
I'm sorry for interrupting, and I was showing the on the exhibition website now to show
Я
our,
показываю как раз
that we are having this exhibition, and you can see not only objects, you can also read the texts of Plato, Tarkovsky, of Arie, and so on. So I kindly invite you to go to this website to see the exhibition itself and to watch with your own eyes what Valentin is talking about. And now to continue our conversation, I would like to give a word to Paul Rosero Contreras.
Yeah, there's just only one thing that Valentin would like to add, is that he is for the for making softer the border between art and philosophy of this and. For making it as much transparent as possible.
Great, thank you, Valentin, for sharing your ideas. Yeah, it's very, very interesting how contemporary artists work with contemporary philosophy and also Hellenistic philosophy, and how it all reflects in aesthetics of artworks. And it will be interesting for those who are far from artistic world to watch this exhibition and to think about the topics that Valentin is raising with his exhibition with ANIZOTROPIA project. And now let's continue with Paul. Can you please tell us about relationship between art and philosophy in your practice as an art professor, as an artist, how philosophy gets embedded within your artistic practice?
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Anna, for the invite, and thanks for my co-panelists here. I was listening carefully to Arie at the beginning when he was proposing these tensions between art and philosophy, and how he explained the idea of philosophy as this big umbrella in which art theory or different other studies, let's say social studies or humanities, can be within, no? And from my perspective, that's the way how I can let's say link or correlate my practice, my artistic practice to philosophy, probably. From this from art to these sub-chapters of subcategories of philosophical studies, in which you can find, I don't know, art theory, you can find anthropology, you can find sociology, and by extension, in my case, I go further to, let's say, philosophy of science or natural sciences, no? Because my work is related to biology, for instance, sometimes to geology or astronomy. So from that perspective, I will say that as well as Arie mentioned, you know, you can put the questions from the perspective of philosopher or from a non-philosopher, right? Let's say from the artist in this case, or from someone who is not probably interested in transforming ideas into matter. Yeah. So that was kind of, for me, it was very intriguing when Arie said that, let's say, if I don't misunderstood, probably, no, but probably at the end of the day, art somehow converts philosophy into commodity. But when it's, as he mentioned, probably when there's a sort of art market that is activating this marketing and this, let's say, chain of production or production chain, right? In which art is part of an exchange, right? So I will say that in my case, I don't work closely to the art market, right? So in that sense, this idea or this proposal of conversion of philosophical ideas by the means of art into something sellable, for instance, can be or cannot be, let's say, because also you can choose, let's say, what kind of artist you can be, right? Most of the time, art and art practice is closely related to this idea of selling commodities, no? Selling objects, selling painting, selling creativity, but based on the fact that the artist needs to live from that selling, let's say. But we need to take into account that sometimes, there's some other options, right? You can be closer to academia, being an artist, or you can be closer to research and still having an artistic practice, and also, showing, putting up shows and exhibitions somewhere, no? So from let's say, based on this framework, on these these options, based on the fact that there's options to work with art, and also to run artistic practice, to keep producing knowledge at the same time, right? I will say that the connections to theory or to philosophy can be established from the perspective that Valentin was mentioning, no? Probably from a kind of more empathic perspective, or he I don't know if he mentioned something like soft, trying to kind of make it softer, the relationship between art and philosophy. So yeah, I will say that if we think in that way, in which art can be a sort of experimentation, in which you may experiment, you may exercise some sort of interpretation, some sort of readings, some sort of I don't like to say some sort of representation, but it also has a doses of representation when you use philosophy or philosophical ideas into your activity. And I will say that it's totally possible, right? We used to do that, not from the perspective that I want to illustrate philosophy by means of art or by means of matter, but I think art works can work as a way of experiment, as a way of read, as a way of interpret philosophical ideas, and also to share and distribute these philosophical ideas for instance, in educational settings, as my case, right? As an educator, as a teacher, as a professor in the university, that's a way of a strategy to share or to distribute, readings from philosophy, from theory, as an artistic practice as well, right? So in that sense, you can have the reading itself, or you can have the let's say the assignment of kind of translate something into something else based on what is done by the hands, or by a machine, or by a transformation, by a process of art making. So I will put it in that way, right? I cannot hear you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Paul, it's very interesting, and I have a question for all our speakers. How much the study of a discursive field of related disciplines such as sociology, anthropology, psychology, semiotics is necessary for contemporary artists? What do you think, Arie? Maybe the first word will go to you, because you will need to leave us soon.
I mean, I think it's not possible to be a contemporary artist without this theoretical underpinning today. I mean, you can try, but the thing is, like, because art is no longer a thing, like it's not a thing that you do. Art is all kinds of correlated processes, and it's like to uncover certain situations and kind of to try to reconfigure histories. It's like you have to, and as a contemporary artist, you have to move in this human field. And as Paul was saying, philosophical knowledge is kind of one way to address contemporary art. I think this is the way that we often talk about, because it's so deeply influential. But theory and philosophy are not necessarily the same thing. philosophy is kind of one of the different perspectives of theory, though I mean it's a very dominant one. And you can see that a lot of artists, they work with astronomies, they work with biologists, they work with social scientists, they work with economists. I mean, they work with computing, they work with data, they work with like kind of, I mean, with film as in with cinema, with first cinema, what is called in cultural studies, yeah, with big productions. I remember having been at a lunch with some family, I mean, some collector's family whose daughter said that she wanted to be an artist and she wanted recommendations to go to an art school. And I said, don't go to art school. It's kind of a waste of time. I mean, go and study philosophy or sociology and start developing a practice, and then later on see where you go. But to go at this point to art school to learn about perspective is a complete, I mean, if you mean to be a contemporary artist, that's totally not the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Paul, Valentin, what do you think? What you can add?
Yeah, I like the how Arie puts these claims out, no, in such extreme way. like it's not possible to be a contemporary artist or those let's say words. I think actually I'm also agreeing some point till some extension, because you know, but this goes back to to kind of the construction of the place where you want to expand your voice, let's say. So let's say I want to be this kind of artist, so very conceptual, very intellectual, very I don't know, very informed by philosophy. So if that's the case, yeah, you totally may probably you should go to philosophy school, no, or I don't know, some other kind of studies in which you are closer to this kind of knowledge, in which there is not to practice or studio based exercise or kind of direction, no, this kind of programs. Yeah, but you know, I also think that our bodies apprehend the world through the senses that are placed in the body, on the body. Now, so the body itself is this device, is this interface in which knowledge, memory, understanding relies. No, so I do think that there is an intellectual practice that you do through your hands, for instance. No, you know you can learn the world out of touch as well. You know, not only out of the out of thinking or out of the practice of, you know, kind of reflecting and something that is done mostly by your head, no. So I from that perspective, I like to you know, to relate intelligence, for instance, to plants intelligence, or how a plant has distributed this kind of quality, this future of thinking along their bodies, right? And in some, our bodies works in that way as well. So I will say, you know, coming back to the starting point, you know, in our practice in art, the making, the action of making, the action of touching, the action of experimenting, the action of being in the world is a way also of learning and understanding. So if I can say, you know, finally, that I can think that art is also this mix of these two practices, you know, a very intellectual practice and another one which is mediated by the body and mediated by you know, touch. So that's an idea. What do you think, Valentin or Arie?
Okay, I think that
Yeah, of course.
Are you sure you want to continue this speech about this dissolution, the softening of this and between art and science. Are you sure you want to continue? Because as Paul has just said, if I understood him correctly, that philosophy is more about the text and art is more about materializing the ideas. So again, we can see some sort of borders, and first comes the idea and then the object.
No, I don't.
You can show us now.
Yep. I mean, I didn't put it in that way strictly. Yeah. No, it's not like this process of first idea, then making or something. I didn't put it in that way. I just kind of introduced how the medium, as we have a body, a sentient body, is important in the process of thinking, in the process of correlating art practice and philosophy as well.
I would like to show the yellow collector, the search for existential of the reality. Just please don't make jokes that I'm making copies, fake copies of Duchamp. It's a car collector. Actually, it's an element. It's an exhaust car collector that helps you to exhaust gas from the car. Anna must show it to us now. And if we look at it, at that collector, and we are in some kind of transcendental state of mind, trying with an extra effort to perceive something what reality is for us. So on one hand we can see an element of a sport car, of a luxury car. I use the details of a series of sports car like M363 or a BMW or Subaru Impreza VRX, where on one side it's just a sport car detail, but ground through the meat grinder of marketing, we are facing the doubling of reality, like the simulation of reality. Because what kind of a sport car can we be talking in Moscow or in New York or in London? This is not a collector, it's a hallucination, it's a delusion, a simulation of Apollonic heroic origins of nature. And let's continue looking at that detail, the sport car exhaust collector that was bought in Hanover. And suddenly we realized that we see some dancing radiuses, some tender correlations. The whole cosmogony of Euclides, which consists of invisible trajectories moving on some radiuses, and everything consists of spheres and circles. At the end, this is an engine. It's a fire engine. It's an exhaust collector. It has something to do with the fire, with the Heraclitus fading world, and it's definitely a flight and a floating. So where is the reality here? To me, it was astonishing. Each time when I read the text of Heidegger, be it time and being, or thing, or the origins of art creating, or the basics of metaphysics, those are just different points, spots of entrance on our transcendental way of exploring the reality. And here we meet this and between art and science and philosophy. And we are talking about the epistemological machine in the movement of qualité to the unhidden. I vote for canceling the word and from the title of our conversation to make it through a comma without and, between art, philosophy, art, comma, philosophy, and then full stop.
Yeah, thank you, Valentin, so much. And to continue our conversation, we have some questions from the audience. And I know that Arie needs to go. And thank you so much for joining us. And we will continue with Paul and Valentin to answer the questions.
I'm good. I will stay for some 15 minutes more.
Great, amazing. because we have a question. How do you see the contemporary term is defining with the global context and the situation? Do you think it has shifted its meaning since the pandemic started? So do we need new philosophy for a new time, or we should adapt old philosophies, old theories to the new time?
It's question of Arie, for Arie.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, I think in philosophy, in a way like in art, there is no new stuff. And there is a change of positions which belong to different eras, to different periods. I think it was interesting of what Valentin was talking about this, this schism between what is philosophy and art. And I would say, I guess that he is correct if you're talking from the perspective of Aristotle. From our perspective today, when we have compartmentalized philosophy and science so much, we need like a certain markers that allow us to move between philosophy and art, because otherwise, like, it wouldn't be possible to do things like logic, like formal logic, which is necessary for other fields, like computing, for example. There is a philosophical innovation going on right now. There is this French guy, this curator, that has a very famous book about it's like something about finitude and contingency. He's a French philosopher. He's a student at Badiou, who is someone who basically has this very bold thesis that all philosophy is wrong since Kant. And it's a very, very interesting book. I think he's very wrong, but some people think he's very interesting. And I think he's very interesting. Just he's interesting and wrong at the same time. There is a lot of people in contemporary art who love him because his work has been, let's say, adopted by a lot of people who work on the Anthropocene and on kind of environmental change and environmental collapse. I just believe that these people don't know much about philosophy, but it's nice that they try to adopt kind of a more serious theoretical perspective on the issues they're dealing with. Whether something will change, where pandemic or not pandemic, I'm saying today I was giving an interview to a newspaper when they were asking me about how things changed in the past few months and so on. And I say, actually, they didn't necessarily change so much. They were this bad for a long time, but we didn't have the need, like we were not forced to look at these things in the face, but they were there. We were living with these things for a very long time. Now we have to accept that we were living with them. So I am sure that the pandemic will create, radical changes in our societies in the same way that the pandemic in 1918 created them and gave so much to literature and a lot of philosophical speculation. But I think we need an entire generation to be able to answer this question properly.
Paul, can you add something to this? And maybe you can also mention some authors, some philosophers that can be relevant to the current situation.
To the current situation, I don't know. I think, I'm also agree with this idea that there's a complete new or the following generation that is ready to answer this, no? Yes, and also the fact or how we use sometimes different references. It can be philosophical references or theoretical references to try to construct, to build up a theoretical framework around a topic, no? And when Arie mentioned the Anthropocene, I also agree in that way, because it's something that suddenly is one of the hot topics to talk, and there's these very mainstream references to always go back and quote and so on, no? I don't know. When you mention my interests are very, let's say, varied, but very different between them. For instance, I'm very interested in the colonial philosophy, for instance, in the colonial theory, which is not strictly related to environmental topics sometimes, but I tend to try to build a connection, right? So I tend to think in terms more of how to relate to colonial processes from the perspective of non-human species, or how you can or how these practices of historical archaeology, for instance, which is something that interested me a lot when I was making this project in Galapagos, for instance, right? So I met this colleague of mine who is an archaeologist, running these studies about, you know, the colonial effects, the colonial side effects, the colonial consequences on the ecological ecosystem in Galapagos itself, right? And how these processes came from probably pre-Hispanic times. So I will say, you know, in that case, I tend to mix a lot of information, a lot of authors, if sometimes anthropology, you know, anthropology is very useful in my practice as well. Um, I can mention, I don't know, Philippe de Cola. I can mention Eduardo Con. Kind of this you can say contemporary anthropology, reflecting on how the human is closely interconnected to non-human entities, and the living in a specific place. For instance, the Amazonian jungle is determined by this correlation between the non-human and the human, no? So I read that. I also read, for instance, in neurobiology of plants, you know, this kind of stuff in which, from a scientific perspective, you can think on different species from the perspective of agent, you know, agency, from the perspective of sentient and intelligent species. So that's the word I tend to mix, let's say. No, so it's not let's say, I won't say that it's a philosophical word. It's very mixed, no? It's very mixed, very influenced by a lot of disciplines.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And Valentin, I think it will be the last question from the audience. What about your future artistic research? What are the topics and where you are putting your attention as an artist, and how in the future projects you're going to also to use maybe anthropology, contemporary anthropology, semiotics, and what you can advise in this sense to those artists who are young artists, like emerging artists, from the position of experienced person in this sense of artistic research.
You know, I'm afraid I'm not the best advisor in this case. I'm a completely old school, old-fashioned person. It's literally Marcel Proust in search for the time lost, and this is my existential. I create art, and when we are talking about canceling or softening this end, at that very moment I understand him and myself. And if we talk about the future of my project, I keep searching that border between the reality and the hallucinations, and my topic is what was in the past, what was in the past and will be in the future. And now I'm working actively on the archetypes of the mythological of the mythology of the Mediterranean. Pascal has a very profound religious statement, and I really dig it. I find it really cool. Literally, it leaves a I don't know how to say that. I find it really cool.
Yeah, great.
Crucifixion lasts forever, and we must not, and we must be awake. And the myth is happening at the moment now. Our myth is happening now. And my only advice is all the mistakes throughout my artistic career were happened at the moment when I started following the market. This is when those ants began. The ants that I was so fiercely discussing, because art and market appeared, art and philosophy appeared, and those bloody borders appeared, and it was exhausting.
Yeah, absolutely. Valentin, thank you so much. I completely agree with you that what we are experiencing now, it's kind of
Thanks a
new.
lot.
Yeah, coming to the end of our discussion, I would like to say thank you to all the speakers. It was difficult in terms of the topic of the conversation. It was very challenging in terms of technical issues with all this internet, and I say sorry to our viewers for some technical problems. And thank you so much, Valentin, Arie, Paul, for joining us. And I hope that this discussion was very useful for those who are just from the position of art lover going to see this exhibition or rethink the exhibition. And also maybe, I hope so, that it was useful for contemporary artists, for young artists to understand deeply how to work with meanings and aesthetics, and theories, history that is very very interesting substance. And thank you so much. And in the end of our conversation, I would like to say that we will meet in a week, and we will have the conversation dedicated to interaction between real and virtual, and it will be dedicated to different formats of online and digital ways of representations of art and art shows. And among our future guests will be a Recycle Group, and I will ask them about their augmented reality experience in showing art Saint Denis, with whom we will discuss the virtual reality work with art will be VR platform, and we will speak about 3D spaces, and from point of view of Art Catch, where we see the exhibition on ANIZOTROPIA now, we will speak about 3D objects. So everything related to digital shows and types of digital shows we will see in a week, the same place, the same time. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for the questions from the audience. Thanks for the being with us to these speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. I just wanted to say that there was a kind of interesting and fun fact on listening to Valentin with this kind of robotic voice, like like a robot talking about the philosophy. It was kind of interesting. Thank you, and nice to meet you, Arie and Valentin.
Thank you. Bye bye, guys.
Yeah, bye bye. Have a
Bye-bye.
nice day. Goodbye.